The SSX franchise was one that struck gold during the early stages of the PlayStation 2 back in the year 2000, bringing an arcade snowboarding experience like none other for its time. A year later, SSX Tricky released multi-platform as the GameCube and Xbox were rolling out of the gate and improved upon every aspect that a sequel should. Then, 2 years later in 2003, SSX3 would release and reinvent the entire snowboarding genre in a way that no one anticipated, setting not only the new gold standard, but rather a platinum standard. Now, in 2005, EA released the next installment to the hit series with SSX on Tour. However, this was an installment that aimed to change a bit with the franchise and go a little bit of a different direction. So, does SSX on Tour hang on to that platinum medal that SSX3 achieved, or does it fail to even achieve a bronze medal? Let's find out. The first thing you'll notice about SSX on Tour is gone is the sleek, stylish aesthetics of its predecessors and is instead replaced with a grungy rock theme that feels ripped directly from the Guitar Hero franchise. Instead of playing as one of the iconic characters from previous installments, you will actually create your own character to tackle the tour. Creating a character is pretty straightforward and nothing overly in-depth. Additionally, you are now offered the option to choose between either snowboarding or skiing, which is a first for the franchise. The tour is all about tackling events of various kinds as you work your way up the ladder of 200 participants and try to get to the #1 top spot. Events are split between side missions, which are indicated with the lightning bolt icon on the map, and main events, which are indicated with a star icon. Each event does have variety, where you may need to outrun a ski patrol in one, while another has you grinding specified rails to your more traditional race and freestyle events. Race events range from the one-on-one races and upwards to you versing 7 other racers at once. Slopestyle events are still all about getting the highest score possible, but there's also the return of the Super Pipe events from SSX3, sort of. Completing events will net you some cash to purchase new gear, tricks, boards, etc., and build up your hype points to move your way up the ladder. Now, the trick system does have similarities to its predecessor, but it also changes things. Tricks are handled with the L, R, and Y buttons, while holding the B button when grabbing the board will tweak the board. You will still hold the A button down to crouch and let go to jump, while using the D-pad to pre-wind your spins and flips before jumping. Additionally, you can grind rails by automatically landing on them like the previous installments, and the board press mechanic does return from SSX3 to basically keep combos going on the ground in between air tricks and grind tricks. Doing tricks will build up your boost meter down below, and once you filled up the first meter, you can start doing monster tricks. Now, in SSX Tricky and SSX3, you could pull off Uber tricks, which were all about pulling off insane over-the-top tricks. SSX on Tour, however, changed the name to Monster Tricks and are initiated entirely differently. Instead of holding a grab move and pressing the B button to do an Uber trick like in previous games, you will push the C stick in a certain direction and the game will slow down and provide a dynamic camera angle to pull off this trick. As you purchase more tricks, you can do more advanced monster tricks doing certain C stick motions. Monster tricks are basically variations of some of the Uber tricks found within SSX3. It looks neat, sure, but it does feel a little less intuitive using this method. Also, when these tricks are available, you can still do special grind tricks by pressing one of the board grab buttons. As mentioned, one of the key aspects is the option to now ride with skis. As much as I prefer snowboarding over skiing, the skiing in this game does feel pretty great. Movement feels as smooth as snowboarding, and the tricks do look really cool, including the monster tricks. When you land and face the opposite direction, you'll slap the C stick to turn back facing forward. While I didn't play the campaign with skis, since once you create a character and choose either a snowboard or ski set, you have to stick with that, I will say that I enjoyed messing around with them in the quick play setting. I just wish you could have switched between these two for the tour mode. Now, SSX3 introduced players to this massive living, breathing mountain that was unlike anything for its time. Actually, that still remains that way. SSX on Tour tries to continue this a bit, but the game's structure is quite different. First off, the game is more menu-centric and has you selecting events to tackle as opposed to putting you on the mountain to board down and approach events primarily. There is a mountain to board down from top to bottom here, but unless you do free ride, which the game doesn't highlight until later on when it's available, you probably won't be choosing this method much. Speaking of the mountain, let's talk about the courses. SSX On Tour ditches the brilliantly thought out, creative track designs of previous installments, and rather focuses more on making the tracks backcountry centric, where it's more realistic in some ways. Granted, it still has massive jumps and some neat set pieces like the snowplows driving up the mountain course, and rails that connect across large portions of the course, but let's get this out of the way now. The tracks in SSX On Tour are among some of the weakest and most unmemorable in the franchise. Every track feels incredibly samey, and there is not one track that I could remember based on the name of the track. In a series where the track design was always iconic, this felt like a massive step backwards. I should say, there's one track that is somewhat neat, and that's the Nintendo Village. This is a reskinned track from other versions that has mushroom and star icon textures littered throughout the course, and even the billboards are filled with Mario-themed lore. In the tour, you'll earn cash to purchase new tricks, gear, and clothing. Purchasing new tricks will unlock more advanced monster tricks to pull off as stated earlier, but unlike SSX3 where you can have a ton of uber tricks to buy and be strategic on what to equip in each slot, the monster tricks here will all be available on the fly. Buying boards has you choosing between three types: freestyle, race, and combo boards. Freestyle will gravitate more towards faster trick movement and animation time, while a race will prioritize speed for races, and combo boards are a balanced route where all the stats are uniform. Realistically, the combo boards are really the best method to go, as you can easily get a board where the stats are 3/4 of the way maxed early into the game that'll carry you to the end essentially. In terms of clothing, there's a good amount to buy here to further customize your character, like tops, bottoms, shoes, etc. One thing that is both an admission and addition are the attributes. You see, you can't upgrade your character's personal stats, which is a first for the series. Instead, buying attributes are more like perks, like one where you're tougher and you can't get knocked down as easily, or that you're always launching first out of the gate, or that you just boost longer. This is an interesting switch to the character progression, and one that I felt was lacking personally. Aside from the tour, there's the quick play option, where you can actually play as some of the cast members from the franchise, like Elise and Kaori to name a few, and revisit previous missions from the tour. But for the GameCube, they added the option to ride down the mountain as either Mario, Luigi, or Princess Peach. Mario and Luigi both use snowboards, while Princess Peach uses skis. Playing as them really is the best part about this game, honestly. They have their own monster tricks to pull off, and each aspect about them has audio cues from within the Mario universe, including their voices. Honestly, it feels like there was far more effort put into this than the original cast of characters here. I miss when companies had exclusive content like this, and it's easily the best reason to have this particular version of the game if you are to get this. Going back on the characters, they also added some new characters, but at the end of the day, they're not really all that memorable, nor are they really highlighted all that often. Now, if you know me and have watched my content since the beginning of the channel, you guys know I was not a fan of this game back when it released in 2005. Revisiting it now, I was hoping maybe my perspective would change, but sadly no. Here are the issues I have with this game that I just can't shake. First off, the aesthetic appearance of the overall game. The Guitar Hero theme here just isn't SSX. SSX is about this stylish, sleek, cool factor, and this just screams something entirely different that feels completely out of place. The tour, while providing variety, honestly felt tiresome to stick with. With the progression system changing where you don't even upgrade your rider's stats at all and is only dependent on the board stats this time around, it just feels like a step backwards yet again. The game also feels devoid of any character or personality that the previous efforts captured. Before, we had these super charismatic characters like Elise, Mac, Kaori, etc. And while some of the characters return here, they take a massive backseat where you occasionally face off against them in an event, but there's barely any banter amongst them due to your created character having no voice. Also, when the characters are introduced in this storybook format, I couldn't help but roll my eyes at just how dumb this was. The trick controls are another gripe I have. The series was known for the top buttons being the grab trick buttons, so in Tricky and in SSX3, you would use the L, R, and Z buttons to grab the board while holding down the B button to tweak the board. But in this one, they changed it to the L, R, and Y button, and the Z button is now the reset rider button. So after so many years and countless hours with the previous games, this completely messes with the muscle memory for me. And to be frank, it feels very awkward trying to hold L, R, Y, and B to do a certain tweaked grab trick. When you're multiple installments in, the controls are essentially legacy at that point, so you don't touch it, or at least you offer alternate control options for this to bring it back to that original style. That's like if you played the Tony Hawk franchise, played the first 3 games, and then when you got to Tony Hawk Pro Skater 4, they decided to change the X button for the grab trick to the R button just for no reason. I just don't understand why you would do that. And speaking of tricks, the monster tricks, while neat at first to see, actually become more of a nuisance to pull off during events since they slow down time. You see, it slows down the overall movement, but the animations for the character move in real time. But because you're in the air longer, it really just ruins the flow. It got to a point where I didn't even want to pull them off during events because I didn't want to keep interrupting the flow of gameplay. In a way, this actually makes pulling off these tricks require less skill than its predecessors. Another gripe are that some of the tracks are just too dang long to tackle, and this felt more so by the lack of character that the environments have. Whereas SSX Tricky and SSX3 are perfectly paced, in part by its masterclass level designs, doing 7+ minute races here multiple times felt very tedious and mundane. I honestly had a hard time playing this game for more than an hour at a time before I'd feel boredom set in. In terms of visuals, SSX On Tour isn't quite as nice looking as its predecessors. While the game has some richer backdrop textures, the biggest drawback is that the game actually runs at half the frame rate of SSX3. For a series that is known for running at 60 frames per second, SSX On Tour opted to have more NPC riders on screen, but at the expense of 30 frames a second, and it feels jarring. Worse yet, even at 30 frames a second, the game still has frame drops at times. More jarring is that the main menu runs at 60 frames a second, and even seeing the character model animate at 60 frames when buying monster tricks, but then you get into the gameplay at half that frame rate, it just feels off. Even the character models lack the detail that even SSX Tricky excelled at 4 years prior to this game's release in 2001. Animations are still great luckily, and the environments still look pretty good. It's just nowhere near as visually striking as previous installments. As for the audio, the sound effects do the job and capture the essence of snowboarding and the rock theme with the audio cues when collecting items or landing tricks. But the soundtrack. Yeah, I know I'm going to be in the minority for this, but the soundtrack in this game is really poor. There is not one song in this game that fits the gameplay and felt super forgettable. I love rock music, and some of the bands here are all-time greats, but the songs for these bands that they chose are just poor choices overall. I do like that the music drowns out a bit when doing a monster trick though. That being said, yeah, soundtrack here, sorry, there's nothing memorable at the end of the day. SSX On Tour is a game that tries to shake things up for the franchise, and while I admire some of the ideas the devs were going for, it doesn't quite stick the landing. It's not broken by any means, but worse, it's utterly soulless and unmemorable, and that's a crime after coming from the masterpiece that is SSX3 and SSX Tricky prior to that. While it has the GameCube exclusive content to play as Mario, Luigi, or Peach, that's legitimately the main redeeming factor for this particular version. If you're going to play a snowboarding game, there are far better alternatives for the console. Not only is SSX On Tour the weakest installment in the franchise, this may very well be the weakest snowboarding offering on the GameCube as well.